tell you a little bit about John Buford and what he did here at Gettysburg. You are on a place called McPherson's Ridge. If you look across the road, you can see the historic McPherson barn. It goes back to the Civil War days. The other farm buildings have been lost to time. But this is where the Battle of Gettysburg began, right here on McPherson's Ridge. We're on the historic Chambersburg Pike, one of 10 roads that goes into the town center, which is behind us. You might remember that the Civil War started in April of 1861 and ended in April of 1865. This battle was in the middle of the war. There have been a lot of other battles before this one. The Civil War started when 11 southern states broke away from the Union. They wanted to form their own country, largely over the slavery issue. The war had been in progress for over 2 years before this battle was fought. Most of the early battles of the Civil War were fought in Virginia, between Washington and Richmond. In those early battles of the war, the Confederate Army was winning under the military genius, General Robert Edward Lee. But even though the Confederates were winning battles in Virginia, they were afraid they'd lose the war because they were rapidly running out of food and supplies. So to get food and supplies, equipment and shoes and clothing, the Southern Army left those Virginia battlefields in June of 1863, swept west of Washington, D.C. and into the north. And behind you, you'll see the South Mountains of Pennsylvania. If you follow them south not far enough, those are the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. On the other side of those mountains, General Lee's army would battle its way up the Shenandoah Valley. By late June of 1863, there were 40,000 Southern soldiers west and north of the town of Gettysburg, near Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, about 25 miles down that road. Some parts of the Confederate Army had gotten to Harrisburg, the state capital, 40 miles to the north. Some parts of the Southern Army had gotten to the Susquehanna River, 40 miles to the east. So you had different parts of the Confederate Army spread out north and west of this little town. The Northern Army was led by Union General George Gordon Meade, a man from Philadelphia. 93,000 men, the Army of the Potomac, would pursue General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia into Pennsylvania on this side of those mountains, trying to stay between Lee's Army and Washington, so Lee's Army didn't come through the mountain passes and take the capital. Well, when General Lee realized the Union Army was hot on his heels, he was getting reports from spies, he was worried about his scattered army being beaten piece by piece. So he looked at a map, he saw that there are 10 roads that come into the town of Gettysburg, and he realized he could use that road network to concentrate or bring together his army. But when the commander of the Northern Army, General Meade, realized the Confederates were concentrating at Gettysburg, he was worried about his own scattered army, so he too issued an order to come to Gettysburg. So it's one of the ironies of the battle, is that the Southern Army comes from the north, the Northern Army comes from the south, but they slam into each other right here on McPherson's Ridge the morning of July 1st, 1863. Now, out in front of the foot soldiers, they send their cavalry. The job of the cavalry is intelligence. Look for the enemy and get word back. Unfortunately for the Confederates, their cavalry's not here. Confederate cavalry, led by General J.E.B. Jeb Stuart, is sent east of Gettysburg on a raiding mission. He's capturing supply wagons, he's tearing down telegraph lines, he's disrupting communications with Washington, but he's not here to give General Lee what Lee needs most: information. But the Union Army does have its cavalry here, and a cavalry division led by General John Buford rides through the streets of Gettysburg with 2,500 men. Now, Buford was born in Kentucky. As a young man, his family moved to Illinois, went to Knox College. Later, he would move west after his West Point graduation and fight Indians. He was involved in the settlement or resettlement of the Mormons out in Utah. But when the war came, he came east and he took a desk job in Washington, D.C. Well, Buford wasn't anybody to want a desk job. He wanted field command. And by 1863, he had been in many battles when his division rode out here to McPherson's Ridge. He spread his men out, 1,000 men to the south of the Chambersburg Pike, 1,000 men north of the Chambersburg Pike, and they spread out across these ridges with 2 jobs to do. And this shows Buford's insight. The first job he understood was to look for the enemy. If he saw the enemy, the second job was to slow him down. You see, when Buford came through Gettysburg, he saw there was high ground south of town, and Buford immediately understands the value of that position, given his training. Well, his job, as he sees it, is not only look for Confederates, but slow them down, allowing the rest of the Union Army the time it needs to come up and occupy the hills just south of town. Well, about 8 o'clock in the morning on July 1st, 1863, from the cupola of Schmucker Hall, John Buford looks out into the distance and he sees a big cloud of dust as 3,500 Southern soldiers march towards Gettysburg down the Chambersburg Pike. Behind them is power, 35,000 more. So Buford will do a couple of things. First, he'll tell his men to dismount. Get off your horses and fight dragoon style. Fight in a way that you're going to confuse the enemy as to what they're up against. They'll think they're up against local militia, college kids, and old men. They'll not understand they're up against U.S. cavalry. And of course, the other reason he tells them to get off their horses is you're going to get shot if you are on a stupid horse. So they get off the horses. 2,500 men fight dismount. Buford will equip his men with sharp single-shot breech-loading carbines. They fire about 6 bullets a minute. He knows the Confederates coming down that road have rifled muskets that fire about 2 bullets a minute. General Buford and his men will engage the enemy. That's going to stack them up on the Chambersburg Pike as they blast away. They're going to force the enemy to deploy from column to line, spread out from left to right across this ridge. And Buford and his men will use a tactic called a defense in depth. They're going to blast away, but they're going to slowly pull back, trying to trade space for time. If you look behind you, you see how the road drops off. They're going to use this like a speed bump as Buford and his men blast away at the Confederates, trying to buy time out here. After 2 hours of fighting, there's bodies and blood everywhere. Buford and his men are ready to give way under a horrific Confederate onslaught. When in these fields behind you, the Union infantry arrives. The foot soldiers of the Union Army, led by Major General John Fulton Reynolds, the man that's depicted on the horse. He's come here to the relief of John Buford's troopers. The Iron Brigade moves across these fields, men who wear black, hardy hats, just like the ones these fellas are wearing. The men of the Iron Brigade from the Midwest, from Wisconsin, from Michigan, and from Indiana move across these fields. They replace Buford's men. They blast away at the Confederates and drive them back. But during the fight, General Reynolds, coming to the relief of Buford, is shot in the head just on the other side of that road. The highest ranking Union general killed during the battle. By 11 o'clock in the morning, both sides have pulled back. There's bodies and blood everywhere. But thanks to the work of this man from Illinois, John Buford, the Union Army secures this as their battlefield and literally saves the day for the Union Army and for the whole country. So with that, that's the story of John Buford and his actions here at Gettysburg. Now, John Buford will continue to fight it in the American Civil War. Following his action here at McPherson's Ridge, his guys are going to get back on their horses and get out of here. They're going to go on to nearby Westminster, Maryland, get new horses, get new saddles. But he'll continue to fight in the American Civil War. He'll be involved in the pursuit of Robert E. Lee when Lee leaves Gettysburg, but he dies tragically in December of 1863, the way most Civil War soldiers died, of typhus, illness, and disease. These guys were living in the saddle for weeks and months at a time, eating bad food, drinking polluted water. During the Civil War, for every soldier killed by a bullet, 2 more died of illness, and John Buford was no exception to that rule. Today, his body is buried at the West Point Cemetery. This monument was dedicated in 1892, right, and was sculpted by James Kelly, one of our country's most famous sculptors. So, Mark?
We lived in Rock Island and then went to school in Galesburg.
Yeah.
All right.
By the way, when Buford's men were here, they fired the first cannon during the battle, and that cannon is right there, number 233. The cannon that fired the first cannon shot during the war. They later brought it back.